Welcome, I'm Mr. Steve, and I'm glad you're here. We're going to go over an advanced scattering system using geometry nodes in Blender 3.6. Currently had a few crashes, so Blender 4.0 is just not working for some reason, but while I'm figuring that out, let's jump into the tutorial and I'm going to show you a cool way to scatter and get a natural look with not only the scale but the placement, and we're going to use proximity and some other really cool nodes to do that. So come on in, smash that subscribe, smash that like, and ring the bell for notifications. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete everything that's in here, and I'm going to throw in a plane. Now I do want to subdivide this plane a little bit, and if I need further subdivision, I'm going to do it in geometry nodes, but just a little bit now. So I'll go into edit, I'm going to hit W, and then I'm going to go ahead and subdivide. I'll hit Shift R a couple of times just to bring up the subdivisions, because what we're going to do is we're going to build a multi-level GeoNode setup, and we're going to need a displacement. So first off, what we can do is add a geometry nodes group to this, and I use a split vertical screen because I like to build my nodes down and kind of order them almost like you would code. And because I've been doing, like I said, I've been doing a lot of add-ons, and so in so doing, the node graphs, they kind of go like left to right, they wrap down, left to right, wrap down, and some of them trail off, but most of the time it keeps a very clean setup. All right, and the reason that I want to have this subdivided and have it a regular grid, and actually I'll go ahead and sub that one more time. The reason I want that is because I'm going to be doing vertex groups, and so if we hit Control Tab and go into Weight Paint, we can paint on this now, whereas before we would not be able to do it. And so I'm going to hit 7 on the numpad for the orthographic top view, then I can hit F to kind of bring up the brush size, and I kind of paint in a weight map. Now what you can do is you can change the weight here up and down and kind of paint in different levels, so the distribution will be a little bit lighter there. And I always like to give this example, and I'll hit T to bring this T panel out. Let's go ahead and remove all that, and if I use the gradient effect, you'll see that if I pull this across right here, and I need to pull the weight all the way up, and if I pull this gradient across, you'll see the different levels. Now this is important to understand for weight distribution. The dark blue here is 0, and then there's going to be nothing distributed there. Then you'll have a very minor amount in the light blue right through here, okay? And then if you go to the green, you'll have a little bit more distribution, and then in the yellow and the orange area here, you'll have a heavier distribution, and then in the red, which is the weight of 5, in as it goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, you will then receive a full weight distribution, and it will be very thick, right? So what you need is a procedural system that is going to be based on proximity from not only the target geometry, but is going to be laid out with enough density to show up and look good, but not be too less, and not have like cutoff areas and stuff. So it's going to be really important to have the weight distribution, not only for painting it on where you want your rocks or geometry to show up, but where you actually want it to look good and look more natural. And so that's the goal. That's what we're going to do here. And I'm going to press T to get rid of that T panel once again. And then Control Tab will bring you in and out of the weight, object, texture, vertex, and sculpt mode. So if we go between object and weight paint, that's where we're going to be. So from right here, I just want to go ahead and drop in Shift AS, a set position node. Now this is going to take the relative position of this plane as it is subdivided, but it's not going to do anything with it because we haven't told the set position to do anything. Right now, it would currently just move on the different access points and give you a geometric transform, and that's all it's going to do. It's not actually deforming the mesh, which is what we want, so we can have a nice procedural like little landscape. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an offset, and the offset is going to be very simple. So what we can do is we can just type in, and we're going to type in scale for vector math scale. Okay, now what we want is we want to displace this on the normals straight up, because this is going to be like real ground geometry. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to call this vector a normal. So if we pull this out, you'll get the normals, okay? And it's going to offset everything. Don't worry about that. Like I said, there is no current displacement yet. And so the normal, I want you to think about the normal as the z-axis, okay? And so you're displacing on the z respectively for any face. It's going to push out. And for this one, we can pull this out and we can type in noise. And then we get a noise texture that is 100% on the z-axis. So if I take this off, you don't see anything. You do, then you've got the displacement. Now, as far as this goes, this is just a single value going into the scale. So we don't necessarily have to do a whole lot to it, but I do want to actually take this noise texture and I want to correct basically the mid-level, okay? So this would be like a displacement. If we threw the displace modifier on here, you would have a strength, which is going to be like with the noise texture, and then you'll have a mid-level, which is going to move this thing up and down. And so I'm going to remove that and come back over here, and because we're only using one channel here, the color we're not using, which is a vector, it's the RGB, you can use that, but then you got to do a lot of separating. It doesn't make any sense. So all we're going to do here is Shift AS. We're going to put in a math node. I'll set it to subtract. I'm going to drop it in. It's already set to 0.5, so it's going to come in perfect. Okay, so now for the noise texture scale, we could go to 1.2. It's where I like to start out. And then over here, near the end, I can do a set shade smooth and drop that in and make that look a little bit nicer. So now we've got a neat little procedural terrain ready to go. If you hold down Shift and left mouse, you'll be able to get some different things out of this here. Now, I want to kind of arrange these a little bit, clean them up, and I want to Shift D the scale and just drop it in here. And now I'll be able to scale these up respectively and get a cliff. Okay, so that's like my little cliff generator, and now the noise pattern itself can be kind of changed to achieve some different things. The roughness can be brought up or down. The detail is going to maybe chop it up a little bit too much, so be careful with that. And then the distortion will definitely chop it up, so you can play around with those values as you see fit. Now this, we're going to output the scale immediately to the group input, so we've got some control over our cliff right here, okay? And so this is very basic at the moment, but we'll go ahead and call that a cliff. And I'm just going to end panel this, go to group, go to scale, and I just want to type in cliff scale, and that worked good enough. Now we've got our basic displacement, so we're ready to kind of step this thing up. And like I said, if you wanted this to be a little bit more detailed, you can Shift AS, type in sub D, and then get a subdivide mesh. Be very careful, because this could lock up a slower PC, and give it 1 or 2 levels, and that will make it look really nice. And then, all right, so let's go ahead and add another geometry nodes modifier. Click new, and we're going to build a distribute points on faces network. So let's go ahead and get a distribute points on faces, and you can just Shift D and make a copy. Let's get instances on points, and we'll Shift D and make a copy of that, because we're going to build out a little network. And let's get a join geometry and tag that in. And what's going to happen from here is we keep our plane. And if you have Node Wrangler enabled, you can Alt right mouse and connect all these. Now we don't have anything in here yet, but just for the example, and we're going to kind of do it the wrong way and then do it the right way. I'm going to put a join geometry right here, and then an icosphere. And just so this isn't confusing, I'll bring everything else out of play. And all I'm going to do is I'm just bringing in 2 icospheres, one at 0.05 and one at 0.01. And we're going to show this as an example. So I want to tag that in the instance. I didn't mean to put that there, so I'm going to Shift-D the join and put it here, and then Control X and get rid of that. And I want to tag in the second one as well. So now we're distributing points on faces, right? And if I was to come in and increase the size of the secondary one, you don't necessarily see either one because they're now joined and they're on the same point. So if I hit Control Shift and left click on distribute points, I'll get a viewer node and it's going to let me look at the points. Okay. Now if we go to the instances, you can see those instances are all on those points. So what we need to do is separate individual instances so that they can be distributed. And so like one icosphere that's a little larger will get a point, and one icosphere that's a little smaller will get its own point. They will not be overlapped on top of each other. And the way we can achieve that, and I'll just delete the viewer node. I'm going to delete those. And I'm going to keep the join geometry, but I'm going to go ahead and save this file real quick so I don't have any problems. What we can do is we can come in here and I'll drop an icosphere in. I'm going to scale it down to something kind of like that. Doesn't have to be any particular size, just one bigger than the other. And I'll apply the scale. I'm going to Shift D and like G and Y and kind of bring it over, scale this one down, and apply the scale. I'll select them both. I'll hit M. I'm going to go to New Collection. In fact, I'll just click the one I was playing with earlier, which is Small Rocks. And I'm going to click the plane, and I'm going to pin this workspace for now, because this is what I'm working on. And I want to bring in the Small Rocks collection. Now, this should work whether we have 1 or 2 or 3 or more collections. So I'm going to click this in the join geometry. And as you know, we have to separate the children and then reset, and that's going to clean that up. And then I'm going to go with a relative position. Now here's the important thing. If you hover your mouse over this, you'll see that this pick instance is going to give each instance its own point across the entire geometry instead of sharing. So if I click that, instantly you're going to see that these points now, and we'll go back to the viewer node, Control Shift left, and we'll see these points here. And then we go ahead and check them out. It's the same point grid, only there is a separate instance based on this random value and the density and the seed as we have it set. So if we increase the density, this will increase the amount of points and it's going to increase the distribution. But we do have a problem because now everything is clipping and that's not looking very good, not very natural either. So what we can do is we can clean all that up, and I'm going to delete the viewer node and bring the density back down to 10 for now. So we can go ahead and bring up our other node group. I'm going to bring this, see, I'll shift and right click here, and I want to bring this little reroute down, and I'm going to tag it in here, tag in the instance on points, and then tag this into the join geometry and just add another reroute. I want to keep everything nice and clean and then create another save point. So now that I've got this set up, what I want to do is I want to get one more icosphere in here, and this one can be pretty big, and I'll apply the scale, and this will get a new collection, and I'll call this one Large Rocks. And now I'm going to go ahead and move my face out of the way a little bit there, and I'll drag Large Rocks down here, and I want to tag this into the instance. And now you'll see that on all of those points we've got the same thing. So let's go ahead and fix that and separate, reset, and do a pick instance. And now we end up with somewhat of a similar problem. So what we're going to want to do is switch both of these from random to Poisson, and I'll do that one here as well. And now we have a distance minimum. We can bring this to 0.01, and we can click this one up and do the same thing. Now I want to bring the density of the larger rocks down because I really don't need that. And we find that obviously there's still some pretty big overlaps going on, and we don't need all that. So let me actually grab the main meshes here. I'll just hide that. I'll grab all these and hide those, and I'll bring back the plane. And that way the original icospheres aren't going to be in there mixed up, kind of like throwing us off. So this looks good so far, but like I said, we got a lot of clipping here. If you go into wireframe, you can see we still are sharing points, even with the secondary, even though pick instance is on. We don't really see that much of a big deal, not much of a big difference. And so we're going to need to fix that. So the very first thing we want to do, and I'm going to take this, bring that reroute up. I'm going to take this and we're going to make a mask. Now this is pretty easy to do. If we come back over and control tab and go to weight paint, we'll see that there was some paint there still. If you don't have any, go ahead and paint it. Make sure you've got your vertex group here. F controls the brush size. Control F will control the intensity, or you can control the radius brush size here, and you can control the weight here. And so once you've got that, all we have to do, and go back to object mode, all you've got to do is grab the actual density factor, and we're going to tag that in right here. And then over here, the density factor, we can click the little plus sign here, the little sideways flag, and we'll grab group. Now group is going to be our vertex group. And if you want this, you can say scatter rocks, then come back over here and make sure that you've got scatter rocks selected. Now we'll grab the density factor that we just hooked in, and we want to call this weight so we don't confuse it. And I'm going to take this density factor and I'm just going to tag it in, and then I'm going to control right click and slice it. That's going to give us a nice little slider over here. And what I want to do is go to the density factor, highlight it, click the plus symbol, and the first one we can just call that small rocks. And then the second one, I'll just control copy that and throw that in here, and then I'll just say large rocks. And so now we can throw a multiply in here to control that. So Shift A S, let's get a math node and just drop that right here on the density factor. Switch it to multiply. And what that's going to do is that's going to give us some control over it. And now we can duplicate this multiply, and let's connect this to the density factor, and let's grab our original weight to the top of the multiply. And now we've got small rocks and large rocks, both with a slider, and it looks like the I need to reset a couple things here. Let's go to small rocks first. Minimum 0, default 1. Large rocks is infinite, so we don't want that. We want the minimum of 0 and 1 to be the maximum. And actually had to delete that one so I could get it right. For some reason it was showing infinite still. So if it does that, just delete it. No big deal. And then rename it. And with the default of 1, minimum 0, and a maximum of 1, you'll now have a slider to control this. Now we'll connect these small rocks right here, and we'll connect the large rocks right here. And if we work on this small rocks factor, you see it controls the small rocks, and this will now control the density of the large rocks. And that's a neat little trick to kind of get things where you want them. And I will just control J that because I'm always big on organization. Go up and click node, go to color, and this is geometry and math, so I'm going to go like a teal color. And I'll just call this my density factor and instances. Then you can go to properties and bring the label size up so you can kind of see what's going on. I'll create another save point because it's super important. And now we've got the beginning of our network here, and we can start working on this. And if you wanted to like bring out some more things like the actual density maximum minimum here for these, or at least the density max, I think we could get away with doing a density max. No, we won't want to do that. That would be for a different, like an integer value or something that we don't want to do it that way. So we want to keep the small rocks much higher density, and we want the large rocks to be a fewer density, if you will, and something like that. So now what we need to do is make a little room. I'm going to hit G and X and just move that over. I should take that one with it. And I'm going to want to base a proximity of the large rock and delete the geometry of the smaller rocks as they are immediately around, and give us some control over them so that we can move that around and make it look a little bit more natural. All right, so this may get a little bit more tricky, but it's pretty simple as far as concept. So I'm going to Shift A S and put in a proximity, geometry proximity, and we want to take the proximity of our large rock collection, okay, and we will use that to delete the small rocks. So in order to do that, I'm going to need to get a delete geometry, and I want to put that in line right here. So it's going to delete all of those rocks, but this is now going to be based on a distance selection between the proximity of both of those. So in order to get that, we're going to need to have some math to connect the proximity to the delete geometry. And it's pretty easy to take the distance calculation out, and we'll just get a compare, and we're going to go ahead and do a greater than and connect that. So anything that is greater than, say, 0.7 is going to be deleted. Now the target is going to be our instance on points from here. Now, the reason I wouldn't take the distribute points on faces geometry or the original geometry is because I'm actually trying to delete the instances. So if I Control Shift and click and select these points, I don't want the points. I actually want the instances not to be bumping back into each other. So we get rid of all of that, and I will get a little warning about instances being ignored. So one thing I'll have to do is realize it. So let's realize those instances, and that little warning is now gone. So the big deal is, I'm going to go into wireframe here so we can see this, is we're now going to start getting control over this, and we have the further away geometry is going to be deleted, and currently I need to switch from point to instances because I'm on faces. And since I do have realized geometry now, I can use the face on the proximity, and that's what the warning was. So now it's going to bring the instances and not delete faces, but it's only deleting the stuff that's further away. It's not deleting the stuff that's close. So I'm going to stick this around 0.7. I'm going to Shift D and make a copy of this. And now I'm going to need to take this distance into this value, and I don't want the greater than, I want to be less than. So anything less than this number or wherever we end up that looks good will be what we need. So I'm going to pull this off, don't need that. And now I want to get some OR logic, and I'm going to get a bool. So let's get a Boolean math OR and connect that, so that we're now going to tell the proximity based on these instances here, delete these instances that are greater than or less than these numbers. And so now I can tag this Boolean value in here. And if we bring this back, it's going to now delete the stuff that's close up here and the stuff that's further away there. And you can kind of play around with this until you get what you want. And as you can see, I've still got some of these instances inside. So what I'll do is I'll bring down the less than just a touch. Excuse me, I'll bring it up, and then I want the stuff further away to show up a little bit more. So I'll bring this up, and I can just adjust these two sliders back until I don't have any of that clipping. And then I can bring up the density max for the smaller rocks. And don't forget about the distance minimum. So if you wanted to have more of these show up, and just kind of play around with the factors here until we get what we're looking for. All right, and here's a fun thing you can do. I'll bring back the main icosphere and jump into edit mode. So if you didn't know you could do this, you can now scale this live, if you will. And let's get a little bit more room. You can kind of see what's going on. As I scale this, you can see it's procedurally replacing all those due to the weight paint and the proximity of the further and closer and the further away objects. And so you can scale that real time inside of that menu and then go back to object mode. But if you scale it here, you have to apply that scale. So don't forget that. All right, let's clean this up a little bit so we can scale these in a random fashion. And so what I want to do is get another join geometry over here. And I'm going to drag this reroute here. So that way our main plane now has its own join. And then both sets of instances on points have their own join geometry as well. So now we can drop in a scale instances node. And once we drop that in, we won't get any warning signs. So if we were to drop this in right here, we get a warning sign and it says realized data is ignored. So I'm going to control X that, but why is that? This is a cool thing. So what we did is we realized instances over here, but it is just a set. It's just a field set group with proximity tagged into the Boolean selection on the delete geometry. So we didn't really send any geometry over. We only set a sent a set of field instructions to the delete geometry. So we created a neat little setup here, kind of a variable. It's going to go back and forth between these two and tell the delete geometry exactly what we want deleted. So this realize instance never comes into play. It never realizes these instances. Therefore, we can have the scale instance node over here. If you don't do it that way, it won't work. So then we just pull out the scale and type in a random value. And I don't actually want, I don't want that one. Let's just get a basic random value. And I'm going to type this, tag this into the scale, and it will just scale them as they are instead of trying to scale them on the vector. And that looks pretty good. So you can put this to like 0.8 or whatever you want to do and set that up. Now, if by chance you have something that's not round and you want to rotate it, you can do a rotate instances here. Very basic setup, but you can do it this way as well. And then pull out the vector random value here. And then you would be able to rotate those any which way you wanted and give them a little bit of a different look if you have it that way. I'm not going to use that because I've just got round geometry, so it's all fine and good. Now, the greater than less than setup that we have here is pretty good. It's pretty efficient. And as you can see, the proximity works fairly well. But what I would like to do is kind of make this a little bit better and make it just a little bit more elaborate so we can bring in more geometry, and then the stuff that is further away, you know, we can still clean it up. It looks good. But for right now, I'm actually going to delete this out. I'm going to cut out the greater than. I'm going to bring it up here, just minimize it. And instead, for this distance calculation, I want to bring in a map range. So all we have to do is pull in a random value here. We'll go from float to Boolean, which is a true or false, and is now going to give us this probability setting. So if we just plug this in straight away, you'll see that cleans it up pretty nice and gives us the ability to control this, and it gives us a better fall off. So we can kind of see what we've actually done. I'll take up that top view again and go back into wireframe. Now the map range mixed with the less than is going to give us the ability to control that fall off very specifically. And so once you get the closer up stuff fixed, you can start working on the further away and populate it a little bit more with the max and min. And you just kind of see how it works for you. There's no wrong way to do this, just as long as you get the proximity and everything where you want it. And I'll show you a little trick that I came up with And right after the realize instances, you can put in a scale elements. And once you put that in and you kind of play around with this, you can populate some of those other areas which are much harder to get into. So this controls the proximity in and out around whatever mesh you have a little bit better. And so that's just another way to kind of fine tune it and tweak it out so it looks good. And now, even though there's no texture on this, the fall off is a lot cleaner. You've got a better variation of what's going on, and the proximity is good, and there's absolutely zero clipping going on, so this looks really good. There's no overlaps, and you don't have any duplicates inside of the other instances. In other words, they are not propagating on top of each other and causing distortions in the mesh and who knows what else by the end of your creation process. So I'll make sure to save this again. And this is just about all I'm going to do on this one, because this tutorial is going a little bit longer, but this will give you a good idea what you can do. Like you've got the setup here now. You can make the cliffs. You can procedurally do whatever you want with it. You can come in here with the weight paint, and I'm just going to hit Control F and go to 0, and then tap F, and I can wipe all of this out and go back to 0. I can bring the weight up, tap F. I can come in here, and then wherever I end up, like I can just put this anywhere I want. Like I can even go right here, but I'm going to do the cliff, and I could say, hey, there should be a lot of rocks at the bottom here, right? At the bottom of my cliff areas, and maybe down in here, there should be some rocks. Make a little bit more sense. And then come back out into object mode, and that's all fine and good. And then you can kind of change this around however you see fit. But that's it. I'll put this blend file up on the Gumroad so you guys can get it. Make sure to smash that subscribe, smash that like. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial lesson.